Well, I was wrong. We get the big reveal in episode 5 rather than episode 6, and they don't split it up, which is good. Though they did leave out some material to make it fit. Nothing vital, but it does diminish the emotional depth. They also, surprisingly for my part, mostly kept the scene with Lena and Ray to the novel material as opposed to expanding it. The reason I said in my previous video that I could see that scene taking up an entire episode by itself is that it would be very easy to build it up with extra content. The anime does have Ray talk to Lena in the middle of an active battlefield rather than returning her to his base, but otherwise what they discuss is the same. Unlike the manga, which expands the background events at the base around the other Colorata present. This allowed them to show more aspects of the oppression of the 86, the squalor of their conditions and the depravity they've sunk to, which feeds into a later point during the conversation between Lena and Shin, that the anime leaves out. In the manga, though not the novels, Ray's even asked if he had gone out to buy a girl, meaning Lena, before the other 86 in the base notice she's an Alban and the atmosphere becomes even worse. Keep in mind, Lena is 10 years old at this point. It also leaves out some aspects of why her father had taken Lena on this trip. He was disgusted by what the Republic had done after the Legion had crushed their standing military. To replace those lost forces, the Republic turned to conscription not just of the 86, but also the dispossessed of Alban society, those too violent or lazy to build successful lives for themselves, now weaponized and turned on the Colorata they used to live alongside. Those few survivors of the San Magnolian military had returned to see the nation they fought and died to protect destroying itself behind their back, turning on its own. Notably, a scene is mentioned where he watched a group of these Alban soldiers in name only murder 2 Colorata in front of their daughters, a scene which should have some commonality to one previously spoken of. We do get a much expanded sequence with Lena and Annette, however, where Annette once again presses Lena to be as aggressively ambivalent about the 86 as she is. Does anyone still like Annette at this point? Because you shouldn't. Though the bit about all of Annette's suitors being stuck on the wall is a nice contrast to the 86 being intentionally forgotten, especially by Annette. It also shows Annette as having made another dessert which is actually edible, which is not the implication the novels provide regarding her culinary abilities. Originally, Lena simply received an email from Annette about the forthcoming celebration, responding in kind to decline and getting a passive-aggressive response that Lena's been turning Annette down frequently of late, showing Lena's focus has been more on the 86 she can't even see than her friend that she can meet in person. Which leads into the episode's first conversation with Shin, where he's rumbled about not being on the scheduled patrol by the cat, rather than the noises of him disassembling and cleaning a rifle. A rifle he's not supposed to have. Remember, the 86 aren't allowed personal weapons, though the anime hasn't covered that. Giving Lena 2 different reasons to be angry with him. The fact she lets both slide, contrasting with her haranguing him over his patrol reports early on. A small exchange about Lena finding the rifles heavy when Shin doesn't also leads Lena to realizing she's talking to a boy in a way she hadn't quite accepted before, showing another side of her innocence. The novels also state that the power raid imparts emotional information that could be seen during a face-to-face conversation to facilitate communication, so Shin suddenly gets a sense that Lena blushes heavily for a reason he doesn't understand. The anime rather clumsily tries to replace this with Lena spotting a couple making out and losing her composure, but I don't feel it works. Then again, I'm not sure how the anime could have given the novel's take on things any better. Shin's response to Lena telling him about how much Rei seemed to want to see Shin again is also phrased differently in the anime, the novel's making it far more clear that Shin thinks differently than Lena's impression. The combat sequence where the first part of the big reveal comes is again shown from both sides, Lena's distant perspective followed by the actual battle with Spearhead, and I again feel the continuity of events could have been tighter. Too much time is taken to move from one side to the other, but I guess I'm just going to have to accept that that's how the anime will do these scenes. The novels switch between Shin and Lena and back again quite rapidly, frequently between individual paragraphs, the transitions being far easier to have flow naturally in text, but specifically in this scene it cuts from Lena being released from the resonance just as she hears Kae's voice, to Spearhead's fury upon having heard Kae via Shin. And both aspects that the anime relegated from Kai's death now come calling. The fact that the low which killed her decapitated her, and her head was flung out of her juggernaut. You can see this in about 4 frames in the anime, so they didn't actively leave it out, but the novels specifically mention it for this later purpose. And the fact that Anju cremated Kai's wreck to try and prevent precisely this from happening. The 86 go into combat not only trying not to die, but also knowing if they do die, but don't die well enough, they could be taken and used to fight against their own in the future. I think the horror of all the realizations which then spawned from this scene was undercut by not having these aspects already mulling in the back of the audience's awareness. Similar to another dropped aspect of Kujo's death, the fact Spearhead seemed to be happy about his death being so explosive, contrary to what normal people might think about the loss of a friend. Horror which creeps in early but isn't noticed until later has always seemed more intense to me over a suddenly introduced threat. The fact that it's been there all this time, but your understanding of the world was too lacking, or too certain, to allow you to see it. It makes you wonder what else might be by your side that your ignorance or hubris is keeping you blind to. The combat animations remain superb, at least. Always a pleasure to watch, even if that sounds a little strange to say. We then have a relatively long bit about Lena's PTSD from the resonance. For contrast, the novels cover it with 2 sentences. As with her first breakdown thanks to Theo, I think minimizing her reactions to these events would have been a mistake. Letting viewers see her suffering allows us to accept the growth it spurs. But I think at this point I'm prepared to call out a trend. Every time a scene is expanded or added in the anime, it's to provide Lena with greater exposure. This isn't a complaint, necessarily. I said in my video for episode 4 that Shin overall has much more focus than Lena as the story continues. Mild spoiler incoming. But volumes 2 and 3 are primarily about Shin and the other 86. It could be that the anime is trying to give Lena some screen presence before she takes a back seat for a while, but if it comes at the cost of other material, I would object. Speaking of other material, unfortunately, we've reached the end of the currently available manga, which means I've lost one of my primary sources for non-anime visual assets. So, shit. I previously said I thought the reveal of the Legion solving their inbuilt limitations and the nature of how they did so probably required a full episode to do justice. I think I'll stand by that, even though only giving it roughly half of episode 5 did cover it adequately, as a fair amount of secondary material was left out. I can't say it was to give Lena more attention, but that doesn't change the fact that it was. I've already touched on the issues around Kai's death, so the second part to address would be the negation of the 2-year period until the Legion supposedly shuts down, and Shin telling Lena the truth of the war they're fighting. First, a minor point. The Legion processing architecture is stated in the novels to be simply based off mammalian nervous systems, replicated by way of nanomachines in a liquid medium. No specific animal is given, and the time limitation is enacted by a program which wipes the nanomachine's ability to form those structures. Therefore, the Legion solved this problem not only by finding another neural structure to copy, but the most complex neural architecture of any mammal. Humans. The more recent use of human structures is implied to result in a noticeable improvement even without the command capabilities of Shepherds. As for the Shepherds, only the presence of a single one is given in the anime, but the novels state that though there is only one facing Spearhead directly, there are dozens of them on each front of the war, surrounding San Magnolia. The main thrust of the conversation is present, the fact that the hope sustaining the Republic, the end of their war, is completely false, and the blasé attitude they have about life returning to normal, without those dirty colorata everywhere, of course, is the sickest of jokes. But the other part of the conversation, about the fact that, because the Legion isn't going to stop, once the 86 are all dead, the Republic is doomed itself in short order, is significantly truncated, and in 2 major ways. First, that Shin casually piles on the despair he's burying Lena in by, after saying that the Legion are an army of ghosts seeking their own, calling the Republic the biggest ghost around, pointing out that none of the virtues San Magnolia prides itself on are still being upheld by any of the Alba living there. Much of Lena's remaining pride in the Republic of her ideals is dealt a severe blow at this point, but the anime had this come up earlier, during the previous episode's conversation with Lena's uncle. That scene did develop his character, but I'm not sure separating it from what should be an incessant delivery of emotional hits in this scene was a net benefit. Additionally, the betrayal of those principles is then reinforced by more realities of the 86 being told to Lena. The fact that they're all almost gone. The healthy adults all died in the first years of fighting, the older children have been dying since, and there's no one to replace them, as the 86 are not allowed to reproduce. It's never clearly stated if they've been actively sterilized or not, but it wouldn't surprise me, and most of the infants sent to the camps never survived their first year. When Lena hesitantly asks what happened to the babies, Shin points out the rate of infant mortality in squalid conditions and without medical care, and also adds that those which did survive were used as commodities, sold, either to other 86 or to the Albans themselves, whereupon Lena realizes there are probably Colorata house slaves being used by the upstanding moralistic Alba, raised from birth for nothing but servitude, or as organ donors for their betters. Osato does not hold back. I'll call back to the manga adding that scene with Rei, where he's asked if he bought the 10-year-old Lena as though it were a common practice in the camps. This conversation also contrasts with Rei's stance about fighting for the Republic. He wanted to fight to prove the 86 deserved to be a part of it. Shin and the 86 of the later generation have no such connection. They can't remember a Republic that wasn't oppressing them. Why should they care anything for it? There's a short point made about the fact that democracy is incredibly slow to respond to a situation until it's become an imminent crisis, visible to the regular person, by which point it's usually too late. The desire for most people to live unconcerned with the wider world leading to their downfall. The fact that a democracy is the result of the people of the nation is one made on more than one occasion, but no single drop of water ever believes it's responsible for the flood. Speaking of water, there's also the aspect that, in the novels, this whole conversation is taking place while Shin is taking a shower, rather than him moving to the showers afterwards. I can see why the anime changed this. The contrast between Lena's teenage hormonal response regarding talking to a naked boy giving way to the abject horror of the end of the world might be a bit jarring to accomplish. I'd also like to highlight how the anime shows Shin emoting as Lena tries to rally her hope, catching herself after saying she'd fight with them, something she immediately realized she can't do, that divide of the Grand Muir is always between them, but going on to say she'll support their fighting, that they can still win. I felt previously that Shin's facial expressions were a little off at times compared to how he's described his feeling, but this scene shows them perfectly, as always supported by the excellent music. And then one of the stranger changes the anime has made. I really can't figure why they did this. The anime shows Shin's scar as a pale band around his neck, a typical scar's appearance. The novels, however, state it to be a lurid red colour. Not the clean white of a cut, but a jagged tear, as though his head had been wrung off and then poorly reattached. As for how it happened, I'll leave it to be clearly stated by the show. I would counter my own point, however, by saying that the art of the novels also has the scar be pale rather than red. But then again, the novel art also gives him a significantly darker skin tone than how the novels describe him, so I have no idea. And finally, there's also a short interlude in the novels that would come between episodes 4 and 5 that I'm quite sad hasn't been included. Theoretically it could yet be, but I think the timing of its best inclusion has been missed. It's a short few paragraphs, after Shin is reminded of his brother by Lena, which show him finding a wrecked Juggernaut a year after he first enlisted, after his entire unit had been wiped out but for him. 12 years old and alone in the winter's night, he had fled through a ruined city to hide until dawn, and found himself moving towards a destroyed church, whereupon he found a Juggernaut's carcass, missing its cockpit canopy and with a mark on the side. A headless knight. A Dullahan. As Shin looked inside the machine, a skeleton missing its head lay in rest. Shin and his brother reunited. It's a very powerful scene, and I feel should absolutely have been included, not least because it's in part the source of Shin's own identity. Shin took his brother's personal mark, replacing the sword with a shovel to become Undertaker, and set out on his quest to look for his brother ever since. What is meant by that should perhaps now be clear, but in case it isn't, I'll leave things there. On to episode 6.